Chapter 3. Mr. Walter Steele. Allie stepped into the cafe as the bell above the door rang in the wind. She pulled the door closed and chose to sit at the table facing the window, making it easier to watch for Walter. She sat down and placed her bag on the floor, feeling relieved to be away from her office. A young waitress wearing a white tank top with a big smile walked up to take her order.
Hey, what can I get you?
Decaf, I guess. Just plain. Thanks.
Sure thing.
The waitress turned around and walked over to a booth in the corner where an older man sat, wearing a pair of dark sunglasses and a blue baseball cap over a brown leather jacket. The waitress briefly asked him if he needed anything. The man shook his head before she returned to the counter. Allie glanced through the window ahead of her as a couple sat down at a table outside and began talking to one another. Allie's skin crawled thinking of David. She leaned over and grabbed hold of her bag off the floor. She suddenly noticed the man in the corner subtly watching her over his sunglasses, sipping at his drink as she lifted up her bag. Allie hesitated for a moment, and then continued to lift her bag up onto the table. She could feel his gaze washing over her like an eerie wave, dragging her attention towards him. Her eyes turned to meet his. The man looked away, pretending he was simply looking at the chalkboard menu across from him above the counter. The trick didn't fool her. She could still sense he was watching. He brought his attention back to his cup of coffee and drank with his head turned away from her. Allie turned her attention back to the table and opened her bag to search for her paperwork, still wary of his prying eyes. A blast of wind rushed in through the cafe doorway. The bell over the door chimed as Walter entered. His curly, brown and gray peppered hair blew in the breeze. He pulled the door closed and removed his jacket to reveal his traditional sweater vest and bow tie. He reminded Allie of a stereotypical science professor, just as odd as one would expect.
Mr. Steele!
Said Allie as she stood up from the table and reached out to shake Walter's hand.
Just Walter, remember?
Oh, right. Sorry. Of course, Walter.
It's quite all right. How have you been, Allie?
Asked Walter as the two of them sat down at the table.
I'm good. Thanks for asking. And you?
Excellent as always. A day above ground is always a good day, as I like to say.
Walter placed his bag on the floor just as the waitress walked up to the table, tapping her pen against her notepad. As Walter ordered, Allie looked over at the man still sitting in the booth. He was still watching her. Only this time, he didn't bother to pretend to look away.
What can I get you?
An English breakfast, please. Lightly steeped. Not too burnt, please. Thank you.
Walter said. The waitress turned and walked away.
I've never been a big fan of coffee. I've always preferred tea since I was a lad.
Allie turned her attention toward Walter, even as the tremor of nervousness ran through her from the man in the booth.
Pardon?
Oh, I was just saying how much I despise coffee. Never could drink the stuff. My family always preferred tea when I was a lad living in England.
Allie grinned as the pieces of the puzzle which made up Walter Steele began to make sense.
You're from England?
Indeed. I was born and raised in Bath. My father was a teacher, and my mother was a seamstress.
Oh, I've never been to England. I was always interested in its long history, though. Events like the London Blitz always fascinated me.
Oh, it's a beautiful place. Assuming you can live with the rain, of course. I return home every summer to visit my friends and family.
The waitress walked over to place a cup of coffee in front of Allie and a pot of tea with a cup and saucer in front of Walter.
Thank you.
So you mentioned on the phone you were aiding a friend who needed your expertise?
Oh, yes. A friend from my university growing up. We've been collaborating on a project for many years now, though it looks like our hard work might actually be finished here in the next few days.
Really? What's the project, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, unfortunately, it's a secret at the moment, though I'll be sure to tell you all about it next time we meet.
Oh, wow. Must be a really big project then.
Yes, or so he claims. Though I have a hard time believing him. Yet, he hasn't done me wrong so far.
Walter replied as he poured his tea.
So you're a professor then?
Asked Allie as she sipped her coffee, trying to ignore the man still watching her from the shadows beneath the brim of his hat. The taste of black coffee washed over her tongue. She struggled not to show her disgust.
I was a professor in physics for 15 years before I decided to retire and pursue a career as a novelist. The same friend I'm working with now even inspired me to write, as it so happens.
Well, I must say I'm rather impressed with your background in science, considering how much I enjoy your books. I would have assumed a physics professor would write boring textbooks.
Thank you very much. No, my work has inspired me in unusual ways, I suppose. I've always been a fan of fantasy and science fiction. I never much enjoyed the textbooks.
Yeah, I have to admit I failed to read one or two while I was in school.
Walter laughed and took another drink of his tea. Allie's eyes involuntarily darted back to the mystery man. His gaze felt like daggers stabbing her in the back. Not only was he staring right at her, he seemed to be studying her in earnest. What she couldn't understand was why.
So, shall we go ahead and get the business end all sorted out?
Said Walter, resting his cup on the saucer. Allie's eyes snapped back to Walter.
Oh, yes.
Once more, Allie dug through her bag. She pulled the contract out and placed it in front of Walter.
I'm guessing I don't need to go over it with you.
No. Same as before it looks like, and I trust you.
Said Walter as he pulled a black fountain pen from his pocket. He leaned down and swiftly signed his initials in bold pen ink across the page.
So, what did you study in school, Allie?
I studied journalism and minored in history, actually. Though history really should have been my major.
Excellent.
Walter replied with a cheerful grin.
I've always been a fan of history as well. I loved studying the Renaissance in primary school.
Wow, you're a man of many interests.
Walter flipped the paper and continued to sign his initials on each page.
Education is my life, both learning and teaching. Helping to inspire young minds has always been a fond passion of mine.
I wish I could say the same. I went to school wanting to see the world. All it really did was land me in a world of debt that I now work to pay back.
Well, so long as you follow what you love, things will always work out. As they say, a life worth living is one filled with love.
Allie nodded and smiled in agreement. She glanced back over to see the man in the booth stand up. He placed his money on the table and walked toward the door. Allie felt relieved watching him open the door to the cafe. Walter held onto the pages as the wind swept in. The mystery man grabbed hold of the bill of his hat, fighting the breeze. He adjusted his sunglasses and glanced down at his watch, then proceeded to stride down the street, passing in front of the cafe window, out of sight.
There you go,
said Walter, signing his name on the last page and handing Allie back the contract.
So, having studied journalism, I'd assume that's why you work for Stallbrook now.
Yes. Well, somewhat, I guess.
Somewhat?
Walter replied, putting his pen away. He then picked up his tea and sipped at it.
It was honestly the only job I could get. Like I said, I wanted to be a traveling journalist, but the debt kept me grounded. That and a fear of traveling. Guess I chose journalism as a way of trying to overcome it.
Ah, I understand. Life sometimes doesn't work out in the ways we plan.
You can say that again.
Said Allie as she pretended to sip her coffee.
Life sometimes doesn't work out in the ways we plan.
Allie looked up at Walter from her cup of coffee and laughed, trying not to spill.
Sorry. Sometimes my corny sense of humor gets the better of me.
Walter looked down at his watch and noticed the time. He waved over to the waitress. The waitress walked back over and placed the bill on the table.
Well, I hate to dine and dash, but I must be going. I have a day's worth of work to catch up on. Years of work, finally coming to a close.
Walter reached into his pocket, pulled a $10 bill from his wallet, and placed it on the check.
Oh, no, it's on me, Walter.
No, it's quite all right. I missed our meeting yesterday, so allow me to do the honor. Besides, my father always said he would haunt me in my dreams if I ever let a lady pay for a meal. And I prefer to keep my sanity.
Well, thank you very much.
Walter grabbed his jacket off the back of the chair and put it on. Allie stared down at her drink for a moment, dwelling on their conversation.
Hey, Walter, could I ask you a personal question?
She said to him. Walter looked at her, adjusting his jacket collar.
Absolutely.
Did you ever expect to be a writer?
Walter laughed for a moment to himself, deep in thought.
Not really. I never expected anything for myself, to be truly honest. I just did what I loved, and it found me. I suppose you could say I just followed the path set before me.
Allie nodded.
Why do you ask?
Walter replied in curiosity. Allie sighed.
I don't know. I guess I just wish I were doing something more adventurous, like I'd originally planned. You just seemed like the kind of person who wouldn't mind a question like that, you know?
I see.
Walter stood for a moment, thinking to himself. He pulled a business card out of his wallet and the fountain pen from his pocket.
I'll tell you what, Allie. I know someone who just might be able to help you out with that.
Walter began writing on the back of the business card.
Meet us here on Monday. Same time, same place. I'll let my friend know, and I'm sure he'll help you out. I believe he's someone who could have an adventurous opportunity for you.
Really? Thanks.
Said Allie as Walter handed her the business card with the time and date written on it.
My pleasure. I'll see you Monday then?
You can count on it.
Replied Allie, feeling excited for once, rather than terrified. Walter turned around and began to walk toward the exit. He stopped and swiveled back to look at Allie as she set her bag back down on the floor.
Remember, Allie, the adventures you hope for might be bigger than you expected. So, take good care of yourself.
Allie looked back at him with a grin.
I can only hope.
Walter smiled back at her and turned to open the door. The afternoon breeze blew in across the cafe once more.
Cheers,
said Walter as he walked out the door. Taking in the afternoon breeze, he strolled past the cafe window with a big, cheesy grin on his face. Allie sat at the table, looking down at the business card with the words, Monday, 4 p.m., Barry's Cafe, written on it. She stared at the card, wondering what kind of opportunity she could be in for. A news journalist position, maybe? A trip to a foreign country? As she reflected on the appointment, Allie heard her phone ring in her bag. She reached down and pulled it out, sliding her finger across the screen to take the call.
Hello?
Hey, girl.
Said her friend, Carly.
Hey, what's up?
You want to meet up for drinks tonight?
Allie glanced at the clock on her phone. She felt the urge to go home, knowing a night out would disrupt her daily routine. Still holding the card in her hand, she felt a sudden urge to be adventurous, allowing herself this one deviation from her usual evening plan of reading for a few hours alone before going to bed. On the one condition, they went to the same bar as always.
Sure. You want to meet at Silver Star? I'm just down the street at the cafe.
Sounds good, girl. Hopefully this guy will hurry up and leave so I can close.
All right, I'll see you there.
Sounds good. See you later. Sir, for the 5th and final time, that's the only size they come in. Now you either buy the pants or I'll be forced to chase you out with them.
Said Carly as Allie hung up the phone. Allie placed the contract back into her bag and examined the card once more. She felt anxious but excited. She knew that whatever the opportunity was, it would probably be more exciting than her current life.
Hey everyone, this is Carl G. Brooks, the voice of Sem from Sem Adventures Across Time. If you've enjoyed your adventures across time so far, be sure to check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/TS Wieland. With your support, you'll gain early access to the next chapter of the book, and even a copy of the book itself. With your contribution, more thrilling and inspiring audiobooks can be made every day through the hard work, time, and dedication of voice actors and artists all around the world, including myself, all working together. From all of us here in the world between worlds, we'd like to thank you for joining us on our adventures.